We have with us Oluwale Osaze Uzi, who is Director of Voter Education and Publicity at INEC. You're welcome to Sunrise Daily.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Good morning. We also have with us Mr. Clement Wankwo, who is Executive Director, Policy and Legal Advocacy Center. You're also welcome to Sunrise Daily as well.
Thank you, Makbe.
Gentlemen, it's come and gone. I don't know if it's safe to say that because we know that one of the elections have been declared inconclusive and INEC is saying they're going to be setting a date, not the governorship elections, I think it's for the senatorial rerun, which was held in Kogi West. INEC has said it will set another date, but for the governorship elections, it was seen that it's all done. But the question is, how well done was it? Would you kindly give your assessment?
Not well done, actually very badly done, and I am not referring to INEC. I think that all of the circumstances surrounding the elections gives democracy in Nigeria a very bad name. We didn't expect that in going to elections, citizens would, in trying to vote, be killed. Citizens would, in trying to vote, be shot at. Particularly Kogi, it's really a very, very bad advertisement for our elections. And in Situation Room, we have called for a cancellation of that election because in reality, that was not an election, that was war. And I think that for people to go to an election where political parties, where security agencies are unable to protect them, where political parties purchase guns rather than try to win the people to vote for them, this is not an election. And I think it's, for us, even looking towards the next general elections, if this is a benchmark, then I don't think that this democracy will survive. This is not democracy. This is not what we expected. And I think that something needs to be done and done drastically. But certainly the elections that took place in Kogi State was not an election. In Bayelsa, it is still very questionable what happened. And I think that for us in civil society, observing these elections, this is really very, very sad for our democracy.
Well, how would you agree with this assessment of the elections that INEC conducted, or would you say that perhaps it's not as bad as it's been painted to be?
Well, first of all, let me just quickly point out, Mokwe, that the elections in Kogi have not been concluded. So I have to put that right there because the returning officer has not concluded collation. He still has to conclude collation and then make a return. If at the end of collation, he finds out that none of the parties are satisfied or candidates are satisfied the requirements of the law, he may still make a determination which may conclude or may not conclude the process. Having said that, I think, yes, Clem was careful to, first of all, make a bold headline and then put a rider. And that is, it's not necessarily, as he said, referring to the conduct of elections by the commission. So perhaps we have to separate a couple of things. And first of all, there are certain yardsticks for judging how good an election is. If you tick certain boxes, you use your checklist, there are certain things that are done quite well. There are other things that were not done as well as we would have. Of course, the credibility of election, you take the totality of everything, and then you start to apportion what was done well, what was not done so well. The security situation left much to be desired. I think I agree with it. In most places, not in all places, but in a lot of places, the security situation left much to be desired. The officials were sent out to the front lines, as it has turned out to be, risked their lives. Their lives were put at risk by the general insecurity in quite a number of places. Fortunately, I wouldn't say that was the case in all places. So we're taking umbrage in that to say, look, when the dust settles, we'll look at how widespread the violence was. There was violence. Nobody can deny that. But how widespread was it, and what was its impact on the elections generally? Security is a thing we have to look at because the attitude of the political class, the desperation, as it appears, to win at all costs, even at the cost of human lives for an otherwise civil exercise, turned out to, in some places, to be like a war front. That is detrimental to our democracy. So yes, I do agree with that to that extent.
What is very painful about this is that it would seem that it was foretold. you know, that the propensity to violence was going to be rather high, particularly in Kogi State. The security agencies seemed to try to assure Nigerians that it would not be the case, with the figures of policemen that they were going to deploy to Kogi. I think over 30,000 police officers being deployed, and that's just from the police alone. We're not sure if the military, we understand, did not want to come in. We do not know if eventually they came in to help with security during the elections. Some people reported sighting of military operatives. And that's just on the one hand. So there are huge questions as to whether there was a sincerity on the part of the security agencies, and it's a shame that, you know, we don't have them here this morning to take answers in terms of how they themselves fared or how they will assess their own performance, considering all the stories of violence which were reported in Kogi State. Nonetheless, can you extricate, because you have said that credibility is the totality of everything that was done, if elections are judged you know, by three major standards that we know to be free, fair, and credible, by your assessment, would you say that, considering the reports of violence that have, you know, besieged this election so far, that INEC has met the standards of free, fair, credible elections?
A part of the conduct of elections, the substantial part probably, is left to the Commission, to INEC. And in our own assessment, in terms of planning, in terms of implementation, in terms of conduct of its staff, yes, from our provisional reports, the Commission felt that, yes, it did meet a certain basic threshold. It honestly and sincerely does believe that. Because, first of all, you're quite right that in one sense it was a story foretold. There was a lot of anxiety in the build-up, and yes, for each of the two states, more than 30,000 policemen and other security agents were deployed. We realized this, we cooperated very closely, worked very closely with the police and other security agencies. And the military did assist in terms of outer cordon security and logistics, actually. They provided helicopters for us and gunboats to escort materials. Because in the last cycle, 4 years ago, both elections were inconclusive as a result of violence. Certain places where flashpoints were recorded as flashpoints historically, and even in the 2019 elections, we had trouble in both states in certain particular areas. So yes, there was a propensity, using your adjective qualified, there's a propensity towards disruption and violence. And we also deployed ADR, the Alternative Dispute Resolution Directorate of the Commission, to do quite a lot of peace building. And that's in addition to all the engagement with youth, the youth work, the targeted voter education, to tell them about the implications of having violent elections, and pleading with the youth not to allow themselves to be used by the elite whose children are not anywhere near the front lines. I don't know. The fact that there was violence doesn't necessarily say that that did not work. Perhaps it could have been worse. Perhaps they didn't pay heed to that. Perhaps they didn't pay heed to the agreement, the peace accord that they signed in both states. But maybe it was just a piece of paper to them. But sadly, the pictures painted and the eyewitness accounts of things that happened in both places, in some areas of both states, was detrimental to our democracy. It was not good for us at all. But in terms of logistics as well, in most places we think we deployed on time. But there are certain places we're prevented from deploying. Because they went to the rack centers and said, look, don't deploy, don't move. Or in one particular instance, they came and carted the materials away and destroyed them. In another instance, there was a community that refused staff from working because they said we should settle them. And in a democracy 20 years on, in this republic, it was disheartening to us. It really, really, really was in those instances. You know, Turkey, for example, in Oglia, were prevented from deploying on time. And you saw the former president give made some remarks to the press, and he also laid blame. Some say he was not hard enough, but he did lay blame on, look, let us look in the mirror and see where the challenge, where the problems are coming from. But in that local government, we just prevented. But Southern Nigeria, we did conduct some kind of election. Last time, we were prevented from deploying from our local government office from where we have deployed. So there was no election in the whole of Southern Nigeria last cycle around.
Some kind of election. Is a very curious expression. But, you know, Mr. Wako, you're calling for cancellation of the elections. Is it in Kogi and Bayelsa or just Kogi alone?
I'm just going to go back to Wale's point about some kind of election. I think, yes, it's some kind of election. Kogi, we're quite explicit. The elections in Kogi were not elections. Bayelsa, we have asked INEC to examine very critically what has happened there and decide on how best to sift out what genuinely happened. INEC, I think, was a victim of the failing of the security setup for the elections. And I think it's quite a shame that the security services did not do what they promised Nigerians. In the build-up to the elections, there were assurances. We were told that there will be 34,000 policemen deployed in Kogi State, 31,000 in Bayelsa. The military was supposed to be on the fringes, and I must say that for these elections, we really have no evidence of the military getting involved in interfering with the elections. Indeed, in Bayelsa, the military, the Air Force, the Navy were even volunteering and asking Situation Room observers to go with them to see them deliver materials. So in terms of the military, we really have no strong evidence of their interference in the process. I think the failing is with the police, and the police must take responsibility. First of all, we had met with Inspector General of Police, and we had said, this was even before the general elections, and we had been assured that for elections, police officials to be deployed would be named. And this is part of the regulations that came out on the security deployment for elections.
In other words, all 30,000
all 30,000 would be named. They would all wear name tags. They would be identified. They would be under some chain of command that would hold them accountable and responsible, and they would listen to INEC. We did receive reports, and we did see that in some cases when materials were supposed to move from one location to the other, there were no policemen to guide INEC, and in a lot of instances that delayed the process. But we've also said something, which is that INEC, if you see that the security situation will not allow for a free and fair process, then please do not proceed with the elections. Because in the atmosphere that Kogi was conducted, in the atmosphere that Bayelsa was conducted, it was very clear that security had broken down, that the security services were unable to respond to issues. We saw videos and evidences, observers saw that, of policemen dispersing voters, shooting into the air. There were reports of people being killed by persons armed, wearing police uniforms, and the police have no evidence to say to us that these are not policemen. So if you do have policemen actively participating in disrupting the elections, then we must ask ourselves, what has been the preparations? And INEC cannot, under that circumstance, tell us that they have done their part and the rest is with the security, and that they will proceed to announce results derived from such a circumstance. And that's the point that we are making, that INEC cannot announce these results as credible. What has happened, particularly in Kogi, is a disgrace to elections, and this country cannot proceed on this part. In the last general elections, we did have state officials announce and force election officials to announce at gunpoint results that elected them into some position. And we did see INEC hold back on that, but at the end of the day, the courts became part of the disputations and resolved.
I was just going to ask him that question, a quick response for you. Yes. If you can answer as to whether or not you have the powers to say, based on the circumstances, from what you have seen so far, you cannot declare results of an election?
Well, that's a very valid question, and that's our point of departure with Clem and the situation room, is that when you ask for a cancellation of results, please give me what power, under what power of the law, what law empowers me to cancel the totality of an election after voting has commenced or has been concluded. I'm afraid that I don't know any law that empowers INEC to cancel the whole of an election. In fact, on the contrary, there are cases, Supreme Court decisions, saying INEC has no power to cancel elections once they have been concluded.
What about withholding the results? What about not announcing, a refusal to announce results as a result?
You're a witness to what happened in general elections, and Clem has made reference to that. Look, we withheld certificates where we thought that it was not a valid return, where we thought it was not a return voluntarily made. For a proper return known to law to be made, our own contention was that, look, it has to be a voluntary act from the totality of evidence before the returning officer. But of course, one or two of those cases went to court, and just recently, last week or so, the final court of appeal in terms of these matters, National Assembly matters, declared that, well, the candidate was valid, one of the candidates was validly elected. What do we do? But look, but they were interpreting the law as is. So now the next stage of our conversation, should that law remain? Or should the results be provisional? And where circumstances such as that occur, then INEC should have a right to cancel that election, cancel that result, or do what? That is a statutory thing which now calls for electoral examination of our electoral laws.
But I'm curious. I mean, Mr. Uzi just pointed out the fact that this is 20 years after. I mean, these are off-cycle elections, standalone elections that ought to have been, prime examples of just where we ought to be in terms of our democracy. If we say that logistics is, just too clumsy to be coordinated by INEC, I remember that there were very frenzied conversations after the 2019 election saying perhaps INEC should be split in three, one handling logistics, one actually handling the conduct of the elections. Maybe INEC should even be empowered with, powers to oversee what security agencies are doing, or should have its own security for the elections and things of the sort. There were huge conversations around that. And one would have thought that, for standing on elections like this, we will have an example to show just what INEC is capable of. Well, you have already said that INEC is a victim in this particular elections. Nonetheless, I'm wondering, how did we get here? How did we get to the point where it looks like we haven't made progress in our electoral system?
I think the most important thing is the political will to organize free, fair, and credible elections. And I think that when you look back to the elections that were held in 2015, you must give commendations to President Goodluck Jonathan for providing the conducive environment that led to an election being conducted without the battle that we have begun to see in recent elections. I think that if the president of this country makes a determination that the electoral process must be free and fair, then all of those who are acting in his name, whether he has expressly given their permission to act in his name or tacitly condoned their acting in his name, because what is going on is a sense of impunity. We can do what we want, we can do what we can, and get this election by all means. And if someone who has responsibility as head of this government does not say not one single election victory is worth the blood of any Nigerian, and you must follow the rules, if that happens, then a whole lot of people will be beaten into line. We have advocated continuously about the need to create an independent Electoral Offences Commission. Even this government had made that demand when it was looking to win elections. So we believe that if people can get away with anything, then they would do anything. And I think that the problem is that this government has not decided that its elections does not have to cost the blood of any Nigerian. The president must take control of the armed forces of this country, must take control of the police, and expect them and direct them to respect the laws of the land. Now, if we have seen videos, if we have seen security men run riots with politicians, and some of them are really up for sale to either parties, if we have seen them doing this and nobody's bringing them to account, then we must prepare that the next elections will even see greater war. And people are being killed. We've seen videos of widows, just made widows, by these elections, crying. I saw the picture of a woman carrying a child. The father had just been killed. How can we go to elections, and this country's elections are some of the most expensive elections in the world? We deploy incredibly, we import materials, we put even youth corpers who are children of people serving the nation on the firing line. You should see election officials, youth corpers running and scampering for safety. Luckily, we've not had any report of any youth corper being killed. But if it's going to cost the blood of Nigerians, indiscriminate killing of people for us to conduct elections, then something is wrong and somebody must take responsibility.
I'm going to ask you to hold your thoughts for us. We'll certainly continue this conversation when we come back from this break. Please stay tuned. Mr. Oluwole Osaze Uzi of INEC is still here with us. So is Mr. Clement Wankwo of PLAC and also convener of the Situation Room. They're still both here. But we now go to Lagos for questions from Ayo.
Yes, thank you, Mokwe. Well, gentlemen, I think I'd like to begin with Mr. Osaze Uzi. I'm sure you also listened to the clips that was just played a little while ago, especially the one from Bayelsa State, where the resident electorate, the returning officer, declared the candidate of the APC and mentioned his name as the winner of that election. You would remember that in the build-up to the election, I think about 2 days before the election, a court had declared that the APC candidate, there was no APC candidate for the election. And I think some hours before that, we also heard another ruling of another court that says the status quo antebellum should be maintained. There was definitely some confusion as far as some people are concerned. So could you please give us some enlightenment, some understanding of what has transpired, especially from that declaration? Does that mean there is a candidate, or, just give us an understanding, Mr. Oluwole Osaze Uzi, of what the status really is about that declaration?
Okay, thank you, Ayo. Yes, elections have been conducted, and initially we had the APC and its candidate on the ballot. But there are a couple of cases that challenged the competency of the candidature of that party, and also as to whether he actually was the winner of the primaries. So there are actually two cases that have come to fruition. The first was by the PDP and one or two others that said, look, your deputy governorship candidate lied on oath. His certification is not quite right because he had different certificates, he had different names on those different certificates. So that's a lie and a material particular, and they went to court after we had displayed the list of candidates. And they had a right to do that. Anybody could have gone to court to challenge that. The Federal High Court said, look, well, we agree with you. The deputy governorship candidate haven't lied on oath, is disqualified from contesting the election, and so is not a valid candidate because once he's not there, it's a joint ticket. They're Siamese twins. They go together. So as far as INEC was concerned, in view of that judgment, he was not a candidate. But they went to court and obtained a stay of execution of that judgment. What that to the layman basically means is that, look, please go back to how we were in September. APC submitted the names of David Leon and his running mates. Let's leave it at that, pending the hearing of the appeal. And people should be very cautious about that. These two orders were pending the hearing of the appeal. The second case came from INEC in Lokubiri, who was an aspirant on the platform of the APC. And he went to court and said, look, I'm not satisfied with the way the primaries were conducted. I ought to be the candidate of the party, the APC. And in the Federal High Court, he also succeeded and said, look, but in part, he succeeded in part, because the judge, after reviewing the evidence, said, look, what is obvious to me is that the APC did not conduct proper primaries in accordance with its guidance and in accordance with the Electoral Act, in which case, just like the Zamfara case, you have no candidate, and we're going to work on that. But on Saturday morning, I think on Friday, a few hours of the election, a determination was made interim, pending the hearing of the motion on notice and pending hearing of the appeal. So 2 substantive cases are on appeal, but in both cases, the Court of Appeal said, stay action. We don't want to, we're too close to the election. Let the candidates, let everybody go into the election. But we are still going to hear the motion on notice. We're still going to hear the appeal. And it is still possible, that the courts of appeal or the Supreme Court may say, there are 2 options, say, oh no, the Federal High Court was wrong, these people, there was no problem with the candidature. Or the Federal High Court was right, APC, you had no candidate either because your deputy governorship candidate or deputy governorship elect, as it has become, lied in the material particular, so his nomination is invalid, and if his nomination is invalid, that of the governor is invalid, and go back. Who was the party that scored the second highest number of votes should be sworn in as governor. Or may say, go and conduct election, whatever, because those votes, for somebody who's not validly nominated, those votes are invalid votes, and using the word of the court, they are wasted votes. So that's if you just wasted your time, and this is it. So there are different scenarios. We cannot say what will happen on appeal. We're not allowed to say what will happen because we don't even know anyway. We are not judges in the case. So it's the justice of the Court of Appeal who will now make that determination. Just like they did in Zamfara, where they held that the APC did not have validly nominated candidates. It's a sway in the candidates with the next highest number of votes. So that is still a possibility. So in a sense, you can say these results are provisional, awaiting validation by the Court of Appeal. And that, again, is without prejudice to a dissatisfied candidate or party going to the tribunal to question the conduct of the elections. And whatever the decision the tribunal brings forth, we'll have to comply with it.
Mr. Nwankwo, how do you see this in the light of the voter? Where does this place the electorates who trooped out to elect a particular candidate in the event that the court says the governor-elect as it stands today is not validly elected? Where does that put the voter?
Well, speaking on a general note, I think that when voters go out to vote, they know who it is they are voting for, and certainly the courts altering that decision is always a problem in terms of the voter who would feel frustrated by the system truncating their vote. So our expectation and hope is that these issues are resolved in a way that is fair to all. But I think it takes us really back to the question of internal democracy of the parties. And if you watch the primaries that took place in the political parties, especially in the 2 major political parties in Bayelsa, it left a lot to be desired. And I think that a lot of what you have seen in terms of how vote has gone in Bayelsa has been as a result of people's frustration with the primaries that took place in both of the major political parties. And this country needs to go back to a situation where people can genuinely aspire to contest elections, where the parties provide a level playing field, and where there is inclusivity, because we talk about this on a regular basis. We talk about the way the system functions that excludes particular segments of population from actively participating in elections, especially women. When you look at even the more representative arm of elections, which is the legislature, you would see that out of a total number of more than 900 legislative seats available at state and national levels, you have only 48 women. This is clearly a major concern for this country, that the system operates in a way that excludes disadvantaged population, and we need to actively take steps, even proactive steps by legislation even to deal with these issues.
Well, let me take you back, Mr. Nwankwo, to something we talked about the other time, concerning violence during the elections. Even now, an aftermath of the elections of Saturday, is set up calling for an ICC probe of the leading parties, officials during the elections over election violence. Many times, we lay the blame of electoral violence on political parties. it would then seem like after all of the accusations, after all of the talks, there is no deterrence. That could be a reason then why some people would say, look, this thing is going to continue. If there is no deterrence, then there is really no need to talk about electoral violence, because it's not going to be, we won't stop it if we do not put some measures to deter people from electoral violence, Mr. Nwankwo.
As someone who has followed elections closely in this country, and as someone who has advocated for compliance with the laws, I think that the most effective agency to deal with election matters would be INEC, and we have also advocated the creation of an Electoral Offences Commission. I think in an atmosphere where sometimes you question the impartiality and biasness of government agencies, and we've seen that even with the concerns expressed about the security services and their involvement in the elections, I would be very wary about getting more government agencies to get involved in the electoral practice. I think that the way to go would be to create an independent Electoral Offences Commission, and independent in every true sense of the word. I think that in creating the Electoral Offences Commission, we must involve all parties and interests, all stakeholders in deciding and constituting the membership of such a commission, such that you do not have the same concerns you have about already existing government agencies interfering in the electoral process. So the way to go would be to create an Electoral Offences Commission. I know that even the president had set up a committee on constitutional electoral reform. The Minister of Justice was involved in that process. The Minister of Justice had prepared a memo that was sent to the Federal Executive Council before the general elections. The Federal Executive Council had given approval for this commission to be set up, and what was supposed to happen before the general elections in March this year was for the Minister of Justice to forward that bill to the National Assembly. I think it's an important thing for that to happen now, that that particular bill be taken to National Assembly for deliberations and passage. I think that the president needs to revisit, and I think that when you do have an executive bill proposed, a revisit of the electoral reform bill that was not signed, the president needs to begin now to decide on what his legacy would be after his tenure ends in another 3 years. That this is a legacy I want to leave behind for Nigeria. He is not seeking re-election in 2023, so he must ensure that he puts in place a mechanism that provides a legacy for his name. And I think that once you can have the president take the lead in proposing an electoral reform bill that has taken into account all that has happened previously, setting up an Electoral Offences Commission that is truly independent, and begin to get people to become accountable for electoral abuse, then perhaps you would begin to address the problem.
I'd like to ask you this one concerning the build-up to the next of the staggered elections. Well, many people have commended the activities of INEC, largely peaceful in many areas, but the pockets of violence are definitely disturbing. Now, there are other staggered elections that are going to happen before 2023, when we'll have the general elections again. So what are some of the lessons that we would expect that INEC is taking on board that we will see that do not happen in the next election that we're going to have? Because definitely, as Mr. Nwankwo said, and as you have also referenced, this hasn't positioned us quite well. So what does INEC need to do to ensure that we don't have the kind of scenario that we have had so far?
Okay, first of all, let me just quickly situate something you did. I think Claire made reference to that, is that, look, it's not only in the APC that they have litigation concerning the candidature of the party. There is still a case involving the PDP and concerning the conduct of their primaries on internal party democracy. Timi Alaibe's case is still in court. It's been adjourned sine die, and part of the that may have an impact on even this result that we're talking about. You also have those other cases. For example, the SDP in Kogi, where the courts said that certain people should be put on the ballot. You had others where names were not put. Similar cases where the courts held that INEC was right, their names should not be on the ballot. So there's still quite a bit of things going on in terms of litigation that might have an impact on this exercise in these two states that we've just concluded. And that is one of the cases that we should look at and lessons we should learn from. Now, the judiciary is playing its own part, but its judgments and orders have a very important, they are very impactful in the electoral process. As I sit down here speaking with you, I cannot say with all certainty who were those that validly contested the election or they were entitled to validly contest the election, even though we have declared the winner in one state and we'll probably do the same thing this morning in the other states. The judgments of courts may still have an impact on all that we have done in the eyes of the law. So that's what I just wanted to say. Now, that's one of the things we have learned. Well, we'll have to continue to engage the security agencies and a larger conversation around what role they should be playing. The 2015 amendment did put deployment in the hands of the chairman of INEC, but of what effect has that been? The president is still the commander-in-chief of the armed forces. It's still the command and control system like that. The armed forces laws are still extant, are still relevant. And there seems to be, I don't know whether it's a conflict, but uncertainty as to really which of them should prevail. But the Constitution puts the command under the commander-in-chief of the armed forces. No law can take that away from him. Logistics-wise, we try to improve with all the things, all our processes, security in our polling units, security in our offices, security in our rack centers are paramount. And we've had this. Prior to that, we had the security committee, which just comprised of the DIG operations, the INEC chairman, and a few commissioners. We've expanded that to have this interagency consultative committee on election security.
Can I quickly slot this in as we wrap up? Can you talk to deterrence, which is one of the questions he posed to Mr. Nwankwo, whether there will be any prosecution, because violence has happened. Some of the people were seen in videos.
Yes.
INEC has some pictorial evidence. Is it just going to be business as usual where these people are not prosecuted?
I don't know that I'm the correct person to answer that, but the police have told us several people have been arrested. Were they the main perpetrators of these things? We don't know. They were the main perpetrators arrested. And Clem said a lot of them were in uniforms. Whether they're genuine or not is a different thing. Now, we will prosecute for those offenses under the Electoral Act. If they are arrested, investigations are undertaken by the police and other security agencies, and then the case files passed on to the commission.
Will INEC push for it?
Of course, certainly we would. We are expecting about 200 files from general elections. We've received some files, and we expect more. We will push for it. But look, are they the main culprits? Are they the brains or they're the brawn? Are they the people who really conspire, who do these things, or they're the foot soldiers? And if we keep doing with the foot soldiers, which we should, but I think to be more effective, you should go for those who are behind them.
Gentlemen, I have to thank you both for your time this morning. I was going to ask you quickly if that satisfies the question about, deterrence. Just quickly, does it?
No, I don't think it does. INEC has received fires from the police. What does it do next? Does it have the resources? Does it have the powers? Does it have the ability to prosecute? We haven't seen it happen before. Maybe this will be one time that it happens, but I really have my doubts.
I have to thank you both for coming on Sunrise Daily this morning. We're totally out of time. Mr. Oluwole Osaze-Uzi is Director of Voter Education and Publicity at INEC, and Mr. Clement Nwankwo is Executive Director, Policy and Legal Advocacy Center, PLAC, and also is you a member of the Situation Room, or you're the convener?
I'm the convener.
Beg your pardon. He's the convener of the Situation Room. Sunrise Daily continues in a moment with another matter very related to elections as well. Don't go away.